Wits University students protested this week against what they call the financial exclusion of poor students. Students clashed with the police, leaving one person dead and some students injured. Government says the protesters didn't force it to release more funding, as plans were already in place to prioritise funding for all deserving first-year students.
Since as institutions of higher learning reopen, students taken to the streets to fight against academic exclusion. The 2015 Fees Must Fall protests paved the way for free tertiary education. Now, renewed pressure on authorities. After consultation, government announced additional funding for NSFAS to address the 2021 shortfall.
Cabinet met yesterday and discussed the matter of the funding shortfall, which I had reported earlier in the week. And the particular issue under discussion was shortfall in the funding for the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS, for 2021, which has delayed NSFAS in being able to communicate funding decisions to students and institutions for first-year students.
Government considered that it must find other ways to ensure that funds are available going forward.
These challenges have delayed the finalization of the registration of first-year university students. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the challenge of the scheme, some of this being the extended academic year and the number of students qualifying for funding due to parents having lost their jobs.
Cabinet also sent condolences to the family of Mtokozi Sintumba. The father of four was shot and killed during the student protest. Cabinet urged police to exercise restraints while dealing with protests.
Cabinet urges the police to exercise restraint whilst ensuring public order during protest and never to use live ammunition.
Higher Education says NSFAS funding has increased to 42.1 billion rand from 36 billion rand last year. Ntlanhla Khatlane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, let's look a bit more at the reasons behind the latest student protests that turned deadly yesterday. Wits students say their fight is about financial exclusion. Some students have not been allowed to register because they owe Wits historic debt above a certain threshold. The student leaders say this excludes academically deserving students who can't afford to pay. The university says it's made various concessions for students who don't owe very high amounts, but beyond that, it cannot offer free education. The student leaders saying they will mobilize students from other institutions, and we did see that activity outside the University of Johannesburg. Meanwhile, at the same time, government has been scrambling to find that money to fund its promise to move towards fee-free education. This comes after Monday, when the Minister, Blade Nzimande, said the National Student Financial Aid Scheme had experienced a financial shortfall, triggering its failure to confirm funding for first-year students. To discuss, we're joined by the National Council Deputy Chairperson at Equal Education, Sindisa Monakali. Mr. Monakali, thank you for being with us. So this NSFAS issue, that's one issue that stopped first-year students from registering in some cases. Government said it was looking for the money. Now that money will be found. Should we not mix that up with the exclusion issue, the debt issue at Wits University, or is this all part of the general frustrations of students?
Thanks for having me. I think we should, and also there should be a long-term plan on how that money is going to be, where that money is going to come from, and this is not something that is new. There were other protests that were happening here in the Western Cape last year in higher education around student accommodation and around NSFAS exclusion. So this has been happening for years, from 2015 until now. So it's not something that is new, and that should also be part of the plans in moving forward. We can't keep on having all of these protests each and every year when we want access to higher education. And there should be an exception. There should be an exception, because why students can't access this higher education right now? Because we remember, we are under a pandemic, and no one had planned about the COVID-19 from last year. So we can't deny access to students right now, because they are also constrained in terms of accessing higher learning last year. Students had to move to online learning. That is another different form of teaching and learning that has been happening in higher education. And those things should be also considered in terms of accepting students to access this higher education. And they should also revisiting the Convention's recommendations of 2015 and 2016, because it seems like those plans are now failing us. And the private sector should be coming to the party. And other different stakeholders should be coming and making sure that we have a clear plan on where to fund or when to take the money to fund higher education in this country. And we can't rely on a austerity budget that was being proposed by Parliament. We can't rely on taking from basic services like your health and your public education. We can't allow that. There should be other provision. There should be a budget that is pro-poor, not anti-poor. The budget that is not going to push us into poverty.
Let's just put this into context. So there was a promise that we'll move towards fee-free education. Then government does start providing grants for some poor students, so they don't have to pay the money back. But this year, after COVID-19, after huge financial, after the fallout, many people not getting jobs, parents not able to pay. Now NSFAS can't come up with the money, even for those students it said it would fund. The government says that will be found, but I mean, classes started. Did government make a huge mess here and leave universities in a very precarious position?
Yeah, you are quite right. Because now the students are directing the fight to the universities, whereas government didn't make provision of dealing with this. And I know they will be saying that they will be dealing with COVID-19, they will be making plans and taking money to responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. That cannot be the only excuse that they bring to us. Because they treat education as if it's like a privilege of some sort, where parties are all basic rights at the end of the day. So it seems like the government didn't have a plan for this year in terms of funding students. That is why the budget that was proposed by Parliament is taken from the basic services that are supposed to be delivered this year.
Mr. Monakali, though, there seems to be a specific issue at Wits. Wits says it cannot allow students who owe, and I think it's well over 100,000 Rand, if they owe that in historic debt, they can't register. They said they tried to help the students who owed less than that with a hardship fund. If they owe a very little amount, they can still register. Surely there has to be a limit, otherwise the university will collapse. So what do you do about that issue?
I mean, they should draw also lessons from other institutions that are in South Africa. UWC have allowed 100% of access into deserving students to register at the institution. UJ have done the same thing, and other institutions are following the same trend. They should be
but can those universities afford to do so? At some point, surely it'll all come crumbling down, because that basically means the universities are being forced to provide free education for many students.
That is when the government should step in. That is when the National Treasury should be stepping in and forming part of this conversation on where this money will come from, but not taking from the poor.
All right.